Derek had been working on the ice moon of Glacius 7 for almost 3 years now. It wasn't the kind of place most people wanted to be. The colony was small, maybe 50 workers total, all doing the same thing, pulling frozen minerals out of the ground and sending them back to Earth. The pay was good, sure, but the loneliness was brutal. Every day looked the same. Every night felt colder than the last. The storm came without warning that afternoon. Derek was in the main station when the alarm started blaring. Red lights flashed across every monitor. The wind outside hit with a force that shook the entire building. His supervisor, a woman named Hilda, started barking orders. Everyone to the reinforced sector. No. This is a Category 5. Nothing goes outside. Derek moved with the others, but something nagged at him. His personal scanner, the one he kept in his pocket for emergencies, was picking up something weird. He stopped and looked at the readout. There were thermal signatures coming from the northern crevasse, about 2 kilometers from the station. They were small, irregular, and they were fading fast. He stared at the readings for a moment. Equipment didn't work that way. Mining equipment had solid signatures. These were moving, pulsing like something alive. But that was impossible. Nothing lived out here. Nothing could survive these temperatures. Derek made a decision that would change everything. He turned away from the group heading to safety and walked back toward the gear lockers instead. Hilda spotted him immediately. "Where are you going, Derek?" "I need to check something," he said, pulling on his heavy thermal suit. "Just a quick sweep on the scanners. Could be a false reading." "Absolutely not. You heard the order. Get to the sector." But Derek was already sealing his helmet. The truth was he didn't fully believe his own lie. He knew what those signatures meant. Something was out there dying. His hands moved automatically through the pre-suit checklist. Oxygen flow, heating elements, communications, emergency beacon. Everything green. He grabbed an extra thermal blanket and stepped into the airlock. The moment the outer door opened, the storm hit him like a physical wall. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked him off his feet. Snow came at him sideways so thick he could barely see 3 meters ahead. The temperature on his suit display dropped even lower than the official readings. This wasn't just a bad storm. This was one of those rare killers that could freeze you solid in minutes if you weren't careful. Derek moved carefully, using a rope attached to the station behind him as a guide. His thermal suit was good, probably the best model available, but it wasn't made for staying outside for long in these conditions. The heating elements worked overtime just to keep his body temperature stable. He could feel the cold creeping in at the edges, especially in his fingers and toes. He pushed forward toward the crevasse, following his scanner's guidance. The wind howled around him, and the snow was so thick now that his light barely cut through it. He was starting to wonder if this was a mistake, if he was going to die out here chasing a ghost on his scanner. But he kept going anyway. Something about those thermal signatures felt different. Real. Then he saw it. Through the white chaos, he spotted the edge of the crevasse. He moved closer, carefully, because falling would be the end of everything. His scanner was going crazy now. The signatures were strong, very close. He climbed down into the ridge, and that's when he found them. 2 small creatures lay huddled together in the deepest part of the crevasse. They were unlike anything Derek had ever seen. Their fur was thick and crystalline, almost like ice itself, but underneath there was clearly living tissue. They were maybe a meter long each, with 4 legs and heads that looked almost wolf-like but completely alien. Their eyes were closed and their bodies barely moved. They were freezing to death. Derek's heart started racing. These weren't machines. These weren't rocks. These were living things, and they were in trouble. He didn't think about the regulations or the risk. He just acted. He climbed down and carefully placed one of the creatures against his chest, wrapping it with the thermal blanket he'd brought. The second creature he positioned against his other side. They were so cold, colder than anything should be and still be alive. He started climbing back up, moving slowly because one wrong step would mean falling with these creatures in his arms. The storm was getting worse, if that was even possible. The wind screamed and snow filled his vision. But Derek kept moving. His legs burned from the effort. His arms shook. He had no idea if these things would survive or if he was carrying dead weight back to the station. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He pushed through the white chaos, following his rope back home, with 2 dying alien creatures pressed against his suit, and a storm trying to kill them all. Derek burst through the medical bay doors with the 2 creatures still wrapped against his chest. His suit was crusted with ice, and his breathing was heavy from the exertion. Medical staff rushed toward him immediately, but he barely noticed them. All he could focus on was getting these animals somewhere warm, somewhere safe. Dr. Lisa was already there, her eyes going wide when she saw what Derek was carrying. She was the colony's only real doctor, a woman in her 50s who'd seen a lot in her time on Glacius 7, but nothing like this. What in the name of, where did you find these? She demanded, already moving toward the warming chamber. The crevasse. North sector, Derek said, carefully lowering the creatures onto the medical bed. They were frozen solid. I don't even know if they're still alive. Lisa worked quickly, checking vital signs with a handheld scanner. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she hooked up monitors and adjusted the heating elements around the creatures. For a long moment, there was only the sound of beeping machines and Lisa's quiet breathing. Then, very slowly, one of the creatures moved. Its eye flickered open just barely. They're alive, Lisa breathed. Barely, but they're alive. Over the next few hours, Derek stayed in the medical bay, watching as the creatures gradually warmed up. Their breathing became steadier. Their fur, which had been dull and matted with ice, started to show its true color, a shimmering crystalline blue that caught the light in strange ways. Lisa ran every scan she had available, looking at their biology, their DNA structure, everything. It was around midnight when she finally sat down across from Derek and spoke the words that would change everything. Derek, these aren't animals. Not like we understand animals anyway. Derek looked at her. What do you mean? I mean they're intelligent. Sapient. Conscious, Lisa said quietly. Look at their brain structure. It's nothing like Earth biology. This neural complexity, they think. They reason. They feel. She paused, studying her readouts. And there's something else. Something strange happening with their neural patterns. They're synchronized with each other. It's like they share thoughts or something close to it. Before Derek could respond, one of the creatures opened its eyes fully. Then the other one did the same. They looked directly at Derek and something shifted in the air between them. The creatures began to make a sound, a low humming that seemed to vibrate through Derek's entire body. It wasn't threatening. It was almost welcoming. They recognize you, Lisa said, standing up to move closer. Derek, they're bonded to you. I don't fully understand the mechanism yet, but it's real. It's like they imprinted on you or something. You saved their lives and now you're connected to them somehow. Derek approached the creatures slowly. The humming got louder, more complex. It wasn't just a simple sound. There were layers to it, variations in tone and pitch. He found himself listening carefully, trying to understand what the sounds meant. It was like music, almost, but structured in a way that felt intentional. Communicative. I'm going to call them Frost and Ember, Derek said softly. The light one, that's Frost. The darker one is Ember. As if they understood, the creatures hummed again, a sound that was almost like acceptance. Derek sat down beside them and they pressed their heads against him. It was strange and wonderful at the same time. For the first time in 3 years on this lonely ice moon, Derek felt like he wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, everything started to get complicated. The colony's communications officer, a young man named Kevin, came running into the medical bay with panic written all over his face. Dr. Lisa, Derek, you need to come to the comm center. Now, something's wrong with the systems. They hurried over and Kevin showed them the monitors. I've been detecting strange signals coming from these creatures, he explained, pointing to the frequency readouts. Quantum-level transmissions. Really advanced stuff. I have no idea how they're generating this kind of signal, but it's broadcasting outward. Way outward. Possibly across the entire galaxy if the technology is advanced enough. Derek and Lisa exchanged looks. How long have they been transmitting? Lisa asked. Since they woke up. Maybe longer. I only just noticed it because I was running maintenance on the long-range scanners, Kevin said. These signals are powerful and they're continuous. Whatever they're saying, they're trying to make sure someone hears it. Derek looked back toward the medical bay, where Frost and Ember were still resting. They were calling out. Not with sound waves like humans used, but with something far more advanced. They were sending messages across the void of space, reaching out to someone, something across unimaginable distances. They're not just calling out randomly, Lisa murmured, understanding dawning in her eyes. They're calling home. Across the galaxy, on worlds so distant that even light took years to reach them, something extraordinary was happening. The signal that Frost and Ember were transmitting had begun to arrive, spreading through the cosmic network like ripples in water. One by one, receivers activated on planets scattered across dozens of star systems. The Velkar were hearing from their children. On the homeworld of Velkar Prime, a massive crystalline structure rose from the frozen landscape. It was the central nexus, the heart of their collective consciousness. Inside, thousands of Velkar stood motionless, their minds connected through quantum entanglement, sharing thoughts and experiences as one unified being. When the signal arrived, it crashed through their collective like a thunderclap. The young ones were alive. The offspring that had been lost in the Great Migration 17 cycles ago, thought dead in the void, were sending their consciousness across the stars. But there was something else in the signal. Something that made the entire collective pause. There was gratitude. There was safety. There was the presence of another species. The lead consciousness of the Velkar, an ancient being who had guided their species for 300 years, analyzed the signal carefully. The young ones had been rescued. Not by their own kind, but by a species the Velkar had classified as primitive, barely spacefaring, technologically insignificant. And yet, this primitive species had risked its own life to save them. On 17 different worlds, Velkar gathering places filled with the presence of their kind. They weren't physically present, they were scattered across light years, but their consciousness was unified through the quantum network that connected all of their kind. They all received the same information at the same moment. They all understood the implications at the same time. One of the elder Velkar, a consciousness that had existed for over 2 centuries, spoke through the collective network. This is unprecedented. The humans acted with compassion. They saved our young without knowing who we were. Without understanding the reward or the consequences. They acted purely out of mercy. Another voice joined in, younger, more skeptical. How do we know this isn't a trap? How do we know the humans don't want something from us in return? But the elders knew better. They had studied countless civilizations across the galaxy. They understood the patterns of greed, the nature of deception, the way most advanced species operated. And they recognized something different in this signal from the young ones. There was no fear of the humans. There was only gratitude and safety. The young ones felt protected, cared for. The most ancient protocols activated. These were rules set down thousands of years ago, long before the current Velkar civilization had even formed. They were instructions for what to do if a species ever demonstrated true worthiness. The protocols had been dormant for so long that many younger Velkar had never even heard of them. But the elders knew. And they knew what had to be done. A decision was made across all 17 worlds simultaneously. The message was clear and absolute. The humans had shown compassion to the young ones. The humans had risked everything to save creatures they didn't know, didn't understand, couldn't possibly benefit from saving. This was the rarest quality in the entire galaxy. This was worthiness. On the frozen moons and in the orbital stations around each Velkar world, massive shipyards came alive. Ships that had been in dock for years, centuries in some cases, began their startup sequences. These weren't small vessels or exploration craft. These were warships, carriers, transport vessels. The full military might of a civilization that spanned dozens of worlds. They began to move, converging on a single point in space, the location of the human colony on Glacius 7. The message spread through every Velkar settlement, every connected mind in their collective. The young ones had sent their location. The young ones were safe with humans. The humans had proven themselves worthy. And for the first time in recorded Velkar history, they were going to make contact with a species not as conquerors or traders, but as something far more significant. They were going to make contact as equals. As allies. Derek sat in the colony's cafeteria, eating a meal he could barely taste, his mind still spinning from everything that had happened. He didn't know that across impossible distances, an entire civilization was mobilizing. He didn't know that his simple act of compassion had triggered ancient protocols that would reshape the course of human history. He didn't know that right now, thousands of ships were aligning their course toward this small ice moon colony. All he knew was that Frost and Ember were alive and safe in the medical bay. All he knew was that somehow, something extraordinary was happening. And somewhere deep in his bones, Derek could feel that this was just the beginning. The alarm started at 0300 hours. It wasn't the regular alarm. This was the deep space detection system, the one that only went off when something massive was approaching. Derek was in the medical bay with Frost and Ember when Kevin burst through the door, his face completely white. "We have contacts," Kevin said, his voice shaking. "Multiple contacts. I'm talking thousands of them. They just appeared on our sensors. They came out of nowhere." Derek's stomach dropped. He looked down at Frost and Ember, who had suddenly gone very still. Their humming had stopped. It was the first time since they'd woken up that they'd been silent. The creature's eyes were fixed on something distant, something Derek couldn't see. They were looking toward the sky. Within minutes, the entire colony was in emergency protocol. Commander Patricia gathered everyone in the main briefing room. She was a tall woman with gray streaking her dark hair, someone who'd been leading this colony for 8 years and had never shown fear. But she showed it now. Her hands were trembling slightly as she pulled up the sensor data on the main screen. "We're counting approximately 2,000 vessels," she said quietly. "They've emerged from fold space outside our detection range. They're massive. Each one is bigger than our entire station. They're holding position about 50,000 kilometers from our location. They haven't made any aggressive moves yet, but they're clearly waiting for something." The room erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding to know what was happening, what they should do. Some wanted to evacuate. Some wanted to contact Earth for help. Some were just panicking outright. Commander Patricia raised her hand for silence, and gradually the noise died down. "We need to remain calm," she said. "We're going to establish communication and find out what they want." That's when Kevin's voice crackled through the communication system. "Commander, I'm getting a transmission. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies. It's audio. Language translation is running now." Everyone waited. The tension in the room was suffocating. Then the speakers crackled to life. A voice came through, not like any human voice but something deeper, more resonant, with harmonics that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the station. "We are the Velkar Collective. We have traveled across the void to find those we believed lost. We have come to honor the one who showed mercy to our young. Your species is worthy. Humanity is worthy." Derek felt the world tilt beneath him. He looked down at Frost and Ember, and what happened next defied explanation. The creatures began to hum again, but this time it was different. It was louder, more complex, and it carried an emotion that Derek could feel in his chest. Joy. Recognition. It was like they were singing, and their song was being answered by something vast and distant. Commander Patricia's face had gone pale. Are they threatening us?" "No," Derek said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. "They're not threatening us. They're coming to get their babies." Before anyone could respond, the sensors registered movement. The 2,000 ships were beginning to approach. But they weren't coming in weapons hot. They were moving slowly, deliberately, like a parent approaching a sleeping child carefully so as not to wake them too roughly. The lead vessel was enormous, easily 5 times the size of the colony itself. Derek made a decision. He stood up from his seat. "I'm going to the observation deck. I'm going to be there with Frost and Ember when they arrive." "Absolutely not," Commander Patricia said. "This is a first contact situation. You need to stay here where it's safe." "With respect, Commander, I think this is exactly where I need to be," Derek said. He was already moving toward the door. "They came here because of these 2 creatures. They came here because of what I did. I'm not hiding while they arrive." Before anyone could stop him, he left the briefing room and headed for the observation deck. Behind him, he could hear Commander Patricia ordering someone to follow him, but he didn't stop. The observation deck was a large transparent dome at the top of the station. From here you could see the entire ice landscape stretching out beneath the black sky. Derek carried Frost and Ember carefully, cradling them in his arms as he walked out into the dome. What happened next was the most incredible thing Derek had ever witnessed. As the Velkar ships drew closer, filling the sky with their massive silhouettes, Frost and Ember's humming intensified. It wasn't just sound anymore. Derek could feel it in his bones, in his blood, in every cell of his body. The creatures were trembling with emotion, with recognition, with the presence of something they'd thought they'd never experience again. And then Derek understood. He could feel it through them. He could feel the presence of their mother, vast and ancient and powerful, reaching across the void. He could feel the love that connected them, a bond that transcended species and distance and everything Derek had ever believed was possible. The lead ship descended slowly until it was hovering directly above the observation dome. A massive opening appeared in its underside and a beam of light emerged. Not destructive but warm, welcoming, alive with the same harmonic vibrations that the creatures were producing. Derek stood there, holding Frost and Ember, crying without knowing why as 2,000 ships surrounded the colony. He wasn't afraid anymore. He understood now. This wasn't an invasion. This was a reunion. And humanity had just been invited to witness something truly extraordinary. 6 months had passed since the day the Armada arrived. The ice moon of Glacius 7 had transformed into something nobody could have imagined. Where there had been a small mining colony with 50 workers, there was now a thriving settlement filled with both humans and Velkar. The 2 species were learning to live together, to understand each other, to build something new. Derek stood in the main conference room, looking out at the view screens that displayed real-time feeds from Earth. The planet that had sent him out here, that he'd thought he might never see again, was watching. The entire world was watching. The news that humanity had made contact with an advanced alien civilization, and not through warfare or desperate diplomacy, but through a single act of compassion, had spread like wildfire. Every government, every news outlet, every person with access to a screen knew the story now. Beside Derek stood the Velkar ambassador, a being named Keth Nor, though Derek had learned that names meant something different to the Velkar. It wasn't just a label. It was a representation of their essence, their role in the collective consciousness. Keth Nor was ancient by human standards, with a crystalline structure that seemed to shimmer with layers of blue and violet light. Despite the alien appearance, Derek had come to recognize the patterns of emotion and intention in how Keth Nor moved and communicated. The Earth leadership is ready to receive the data transfer, Keth Nor said, their voice carrying those harmonics that Derek had learned to understand. 3,000 years of technological advancement. Medical knowledge that will eliminate diseases your species has fought since your beginning. Energy systems that will power your civilization without destroying your world. All offered freely. Derek nodded, still struggling to fully comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. They still can't quite believe it, he said. They keep waiting for the catch, for the hidden cost. In human history, gifts this large from advanced civilizations usually mean something terrible is coming. Keth Nor made a sound that Derek had learned was the Velkar equivalent of laughter. We understand this skepticism. Your species has survived through caution and suspicion. This is not a weakness. But there is no hidden agenda here, Derek. You showed our young ones mercy when you could have left them to die. That act was its own reward. The technology we offer is simply how we express gratitude. It is how we say thank you. The data began to transmit. Terabytes of information flooded across the quantum communication network that the Velkar had established between Glacius 7 and Earth. Star charts showing safe routes through the galaxy. Medical databases containing cures for cancers, for genetic disorders, for diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia. Energy production methods that were clean and virtually limitless. Agricultural techniques that could end world hunger. It was almost too much to process. In another part of the station, Frost and Ember were growing. They'd doubled in size already, and their fur had taken on an even more brilliant crystalline sheen. They no longer needed Derek's constant care, but they still stayed close to him. They'd become symbols, the physical representation of what could happen when different species chose compassion over fear. News crews from Earth had interviewed Derek dozens of times about the creatures, but the story that fascinated people most was always the same. A human had risked his life for two beings he didn't know. That single decision had changed the course of history. 3 weeks ago, Commander Patricia had called Derek into her office. She'd been different since the Velkar arrival, quieter, more thoughtful. She'd handed him a data pad with a single document on it. "Read this," she'd said. It was an official proposal from the United Earth government. They wanted Derek to take on a new role. They were calling it Liaison of First Contact. It meant he would be humanity's primary representative in ongoing negotiations with the Velkar. He would help establish protocols for trade, for technology sharing, for cultural exchange. He would be the bridge between two species learning to understand one another. Derek had stared at the proposal for a long time. He thought about how 6 months ago he'd been just another worker on an ice moon, doing a job that felt meaningless, wondering if his life amounted to anything. Now he was being asked to help shape the future of his entire species. He'd accepted. Now, as Derek watched the data transfer complete, he felt Frost and Ember move closer to him. They leaned against his legs, humming softly. The creatures had a way of knowing when Derek was thinking deeply about something. They offered comfort without words, a connection that had grown stronger over the months. "Your leaders want to know when we can begin the technology transfer for energy systems," Keth Nor said, studying the incoming messages from Earth. "They're also requesting information about Velkar culture, history, and philosophy. They want to understand us as more than just advanced beings with advanced gifts." Derek smiled. "That's good. That means they're starting to see you as people, not just as the source of free technology." "And how do you see us, Derek?" Keth Nor asked, and there was genuine curiosity in the question. Derek thought about it. He thought about the first moment he'd found Frost and Ember in that crevasse, frozen and dying. He thought about the months he'd spent learning to understand their vibrations, their language, their way of thinking. He thought about how they taught him that compassion didn't require understanding. Sometimes it just required the willingness to help. "I see you as friends," Derek said simply. "As partners. As people worth helping just like anyone else." Keth Nor made that laughing sound again. "Then humanity will do well, Derek. Your species understands what many advanced civilizations take millennia to learn. You understand that consciousness, no matter what form it takes, is precious. That is the real gift you have given us. Outside the station, the stars were beginning to shift as more Velkar vessels arrived. Not warships this time but colony ships, trade vessels, explorers. The network was expanding. Humanity was no longer alone in the galaxy. And it had all started with one person who couldn't ignore the suffering of creatures he didn't even know. Derek stood with his hand resting on Frost and Ember's warm fur, watching the future unfold. One act of compassion. That's all it had taken to change everything.